G'day, this is Jim. Today I'm going to make a fishing pole out of bamboo. I got this idea from stories from my old man who grew up in the bush in Australia, and they used to take a piece of bamboo and just tie a bit of fishing line to the end of it and go fishing in the river to catch bass and yellow belly and fish like that. So I thought I'd take that idea and modernise it a bit and have a go at making a rod myself. You can see here the pole wasn't quite straight, so I picked the best side to put the guides on and ran some thin blue tape to just use as a bit of an edge line to make sure that I was putting these guides in the right place. I had 6 guides from an old fishing rod that I had found and discarded, and I'd kept these tips with the idea of making this in the future. I glued them in place using some CA glue and a bit of activator to make them stick, and then held them in place with a bit more tape. With the eyelet on the tip, I first used CA glue to glue a little nail into the tip to fix this to the end of the rod. But I later pulled this out and used 2-part epoxy, as I felt that I needed something a bit stronger to hold the eyelet to the nail, because the nail would only be held on using the thread, which you'll see later on in the video. Here I'm just taking a coach screw and putting it into the drill so that I can attach it to the end of the rod, and then taping up the rod to the chuck in the drill, which I use to spin the rod. Here I'm just using some fly tying thread. It's quite strong, but you do need to wrap the rod quite a bit, which is why I used the drill to spin the rod. As you can see, it would take a long time to spin it by hand, but the electric drill makes short work of it. I just make sure I get quite a few wraps, enough that it's holding it firmly in place, and then I tie off the thread and use some nail polish to hold the thread in place and stop it from undoing. You could also use CA glue or 2-part epoxy for the same thing, but nail polish is nice and cheap and easy to apply, and it works quite well. It's a trick I learnt from tying flies. The difficult part was when I got closer to the tip of the rod and I couldn't reach the drill myself. So I had to get the help of my brother to control the drill while I fed the thread onto the rod. And I used an old tripod as a guide so that we could spin the rod and allow the end to be suspended in the air to allow it to move as freely as we could with a bent rod. You can see that being so bent, it was quite difficult, and trying to keep it steady was a bit of a challenge, but I got there in the end. And of course the worst of this was when I did this for the tip, which you'll see in a moment. It was pretty crazy how bent the rod was and therefore how much it spun around, but we did get there in the end. Now, I thought long and hard about how I would attach the reel to the rod, and the simplest idea that I came up with was just using these zip ties. And it worked out really well actually. I don't know that I could find anything that would be as simple and easy to use as zip ties and stronger. But if anyone else has any ideas on what I could have done better here, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, so that maybe I give it a crack next time. And there's the completed rod. It turned out better than I expected actually. It didn't cast quite as well as a normal rod because it's obviously not as flexible. You don't get as much of a whipping action when you cast, but it still cast fairly well and I could get good distance. But it worked really well, and I did actually catch something which proved that the guides were very strong and that the rod could hold up to a fairly heavy fish, and you'll see why in just a moment. Got one. I thought for sure I was in here. I'd been standing at this spot which is not very well renowned for its fishing. Although the person who was standing next to me did catch a brim or bream, depending on where you are in the world. So I thought, oh yeah, maybe I'm on here for a good brim. But as I started to reel it in, I noticed that it wasn't kicking quite like a fish. and although it was very heavy and it was fighting, I thought that perhaps it was an old catfish or something like that, but then when I got closer to the water I realised it was actually a turtle. Which is a shame, for two reasons. One, this was all I caught on the day that I was out there using the rod, but two, this is not exactly what you want to be catching. I was a little concerned with the turtle and its well-being, so I was pretty quick to try and get it out of the water. Fortunately, it was only just hooked in its skin on its side of its leg, and I was able to quickly get the hook out and doing very little damage to the turtle and actually get it back into the water nice and quickly without hopefully causing it too much stress. But the good news was that the rod worked really well and it held up to the stresses of pulling in something that was quite heavy, and I hope you enjoyed. Consider subscribing, and to all my existing subscribers, thanks very much for your continued support, and until next time, take it easy.